The sun cast long shadows over the Colorado plains as Dahlia Kennedy's shovel struck hard, packed earth, her tears falling faster than the dirt she displaced. She'd been digging since dawn, her dress stained with mud, her hands bloodied and raw. The small wooden coffin waited nearby, a painful reminder of what she'd lost. Her son, just 4 years old, taken by fever 3 days prior, leaving Dahlia alone in a world that had already stolen too much from her. Roy Zimmerman pulled his horse to a stop on the ridge overlooking the small homestead. He hadn't planned to venture this far from the cattle drive, but something, perhaps Providence, had led him here. The sight below made his chest tighten. A woman digging a grave, so small it could only be for one thing. He'd seen enough death in his 30 years to recognize its aftermath. "Whoa, Samson," he murmured to his horse, deciding whether to intervene or let the woman have her privacy and grief. But the way her shoulders trembled with each thrust of the shovel made the decision for him. Some burdens weren't meant to be carried alone. As Roy approached, the sound of his horse's hooves caused Dahlia to look up, her tear-streaked face a portrait of devastation. She didn't stop digging, nor did she acknowledge him beyond that initial glance. The determination in her movements spoke volumes. She would complete this terrible task, even if it broke her. "Madam," Roy said softly, dismounting several paces away, "allow me to help you." Dahlia's hands tightened around the shovel. "I don't need help," she said, her voice cracked from crying. "He's my son, my responsibility." Roy removed his hat, holding it respectfully against his chest. No mother should have to dig her child's grave alone. Something in his tone, the genuine compassion, made Dahlia pause. She looked at him fully now, taking in his weathered face, the kind eyes that had seen hardship but hadn't grown cold from it. He wasn't like the other men who'd passed through Alamosa, Colorado, those with hard faces and harder hearts. "You're not from around here," she stated, more observation than question. "No, madam. I'm moving cattle north with Johnson's outfit, just passing through." Roy took a cautious step closer. "My name is Roy Zimmerman." Dahlia's grip on the shovel loosened slightly. "Dahlia Kennedy." The introduction seemed to break something inside her. She suddenly slumped to her knees beside the half-dug grave, the shovel falling beside her. Grief overtook her once more, her body shaking with sobs. Roy moved forward then, carefully taking the shovel. "Let me, Mrs. Kennedy." "Miss," she corrected automatically through her tears. "My husband died 2 winters ago, pneumonia. Now my boy, my Jacob." She couldn't finish. Roy nodded solemnly and began to dig, each thrust of the shovel deliberate and respectful. He worked steadily, saying nothing but conveying through his actions what words couldn't express. Dahlia remained kneeling nearby, clutching a small wooden toy horse, her son's favorite. The grave took an hour to complete. When Roy finished, he stood silently aside as Dahlia placed the toy in the small coffin, whispering private words of love to her child. Together, they lowered the coffin into the earth. Roy waited for her signal before he began filling the grave, covering the small coffin with dirt that fell like final farewells. When it was done, Dahlia placed wildflowers on the mound. "Thank you," she whispered, the first words spoken since he'd begun digging. "I don't know how I would have managed." Roy replaced his hat. "No thanks needed, Miss Kennedy." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant call of meadowlarks. Roy knew he should return to the cattle drive. They'd be looking for him by now, but something kept him rooted to the spot. "Do you have family nearby?" he finally asked. Dahlia shook her head. "No. My parents died back east. My husband brought us west for a fresh start, but—" She gestured helplessly at her surroundings, the small cabin, the untended fields, the fresh grave. "Now it's just me." Roy nodded, understanding better than most the isolation of the frontier. The drive will be in the area for a few days. If you'd permit me, I could help with some repairs around your place. The offer surprised them both. Dahlia studied him, wariness mingling with desperate need. She had no means to pay him, and unmarried women didn't invite strange men to their homesteads without inviting gossip or worse. "Why would you do that?" she asked plainly. Roy considered her question. "Because someone once helped me when I was at my lowest," he said simply. "And because no one should face the hard times alone." His honesty disarmed her. Dahlia looked at the grave once more, then toward her neglected farm. Since her husband's death, she'd managed to keep herself and Jacob fed, but just barely. With Jacob gone, the future stretched before her, empty and daunting. "There's a barn where you could sleep," she said finally, "and I can provide meals." Roy nodded, understanding the boundaries she was setting. "That would be more than fair. I'll ride back to tell the foreman, then return by morning." As he mounted his horse, Roy looked back at Dahlia, still standing vigil by her son's grave. She seemed both younger and older than her actual years. He guessed she wasn't much past 25, a woman who had endured too much, too soon. "Miss Kennedy," he called softly, "you might want to come inside soon. Looks like rain's coming." Dahlia glanced at the darkening western sky and nodded, though she made no move to leave. Roy understood. Some partings couldn't be rushed. True to his word, Roy returned the next morning. He'd explained the situation to his foreman, who'd granted him leave for 3 days before he needed to catch up with the drive in Pueblo. It wasn't much time, but Roy was determined to make it count. He found Dahlia in her garden, attempting to salvage what was left of her withered crops. The previous night's rain had turned the soil to mud, making her efforts both difficult and futile. "Morning, Miss Kennedy," he greeted, tying Samson to the hitching post. He'd brought supplies from town lumber, nails and food staples that would last her for weeks. Dahlia straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, but she seemed steadier than yesterday. "Mr. Zimmerman, you actually came back." "Said I would," he replied simply, unloading his saddlebags. "I thought I'd start with your roof." "Noticed some missing shingles yesterday." Dahlia nodded, watching him uncertainly. She wasn't accustomed to accepting help, especially from a stranger. But something about Roy Zimmerman's straightforward manner put her at ease. He wasn't offering charity, he was offering partnership, however temporary. "I appreciate it," she said, "but I can't pay you." Roy shook his head. "Didn't ask for payment, just doing what needs doing." They settled into an unspoken routine. Roy worked on the cabin's exterior while Dahlia continued her efforts in the garden. By midday, the summer heat had intensified, and Roy had removed his shirt, his tanned skin gleaming with sweat as he hammered new shingles into place. Dahlia brought him water, averting her eyes from his bare chest. "You must be hungry," she said. "I've made some stew." Roy climbed down the ladder, accepting the water gratefully. "Thank you, Miss Kennedy." "Dahlia," she corrected softly. "If you're helping rebuild my home, you might as well use my name." Roy smiled for the first time since they'd met. "Dahlia," he repeated, the name sounding warm in his deep voice. They ate on the porch, the silence between them companionable rather than strained. Roy noticed Dahlia's gaze drifting periodically to the small grave beneath the cottonwood tree. "Tell me about your boy," Roy said gently. "If you want to, that is." Dahlia's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. For a moment, Roy thought he'd overstepped, but then she began to speak, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Jacob was born during the worst blizzard Alamosa had seen in 20 years. My husband, Thomas, had to deliver him himself because the doctor couldn't reach us. He was such a fighter from the start," she said. a sad smile touching her lips. He loved stories about animals and would collect any creature he could find: frogs, lizards, even tried to adopt a young coyote once. Roy listened intently as Dahlia shared memories of her son, his first steps, his contagious laugh, his fascination with Roy's profession. He wanted to be a cowboy, she said, her eyes meeting Roy's. Whenever riders passed through, he'd watch them with such wonder. "Sounds like a fine boy," Roy said sincerely. He was. Dahlia's voice caught. The fever came so suddenly. One day he was playing, the next. She shook her head, unable to continue. Roy fought the urge to reach for her hand. "Grief's a strange trail," he said instead. "Never straight, never predictable, but it does lead somewhere eventually." Dahlia studied him. "You speak from experience." Roy nodded, his gaze turning distant. "Lost my sister and her husband in a fire some years back. Raised their daughter until she married last spring." "That was generous of you." "Wasn't generosity, was family," Roy corrected. "Sometimes the path we think we're on suddenly forks and we have to choose a different direction." They finished their meal in thoughtful silence. As Dahlia gathered the dishes, she paused. "Your niece, is she happy?" The question surprised Roy, but he understood its importance to a woman who had just buried her only child. "She is. Married a blacksmith from Denver. They're expecting their first child this winter." Dahlia nodded, a complex mixture of emotions crossing her face: happiness for his niece, grief for her own loss, and perhaps a touch of wistfulness for what might have been. "Good," she said finally. "That's good." The afternoon passed quickly. Roy fixed the roof, repaired a broken window, and reinforced the porch steps that had begun to rot. By sunset, the cabin looked more secure than it had in months. Roy was checking the chicken coop for predator access when he heard Dahlia cry out. He rushed to the garden to find her kneeling in the dirt, clutching something small in her hands. "Dahlia," he approached cautiously. She held up a tiny wooden soldier, crudely carved but obviously cherished. "Jacob's," she explained, her voice tight. "I thought it was lost." Roy knelt beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "May I?" She handed him the toy. Roy examined it, noting the careful details someone had whittled into the small figure. "Your husband's work," Dahlia nodded. "Thomas made him a new one each birthday. This was from his last." Her fingers trembled as she took it back, cradling it like the precious artifact it was. "You should keep that close," Roy said gently. "Memories are worth holding on to even when they hurt." Dahlia looked at him, tears welling in her eyes but not falling. "Does it ever stop hurting?" Roy considered her question carefully. "Not entirely, but one day you'll realize you've gone a whole hour without feeling that ache, then a whole afternoon. The spaces between the pain get longer." His honesty seemed to comfort her more than platitudes would have. Dahlia rose, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Thank you for the truth." Roy nodded, standing as well. "Sun's getting low. I should see to my horse, then make some repairs to your barn before dark. You'll stay for supper if you're offering." "I am." As the days passed, Roy's steady presence became a comfort Dahlia hadn't expected. He worked from dawn until dusk, repairing what needed fixing, rebuilding what couldn't be saved. They developed a rhythm together, Dahlia cooking their meals, Roy bringing in firewood and fresh game. They spoke of practical matters mostly, occasionally sharing stories from their pasts. On the evening of the third day, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the tall grass, Roy broke the companionable silence. "I need to leave tomorrow," he said, regret evident in his tone. "Drive's moving north and I've got obligations." Dahlia nodded, having known this moment would come. Still, the thought of returning to her solitary existence made her chest tighten painfully. "You've done more than enough," she assured him, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. "I can manage now." Roy turned to face her, his expression serious. "You can more than manage, Dahlia. You're stronger than you realize." Something in his gaze admiration perhaps made her look away. In just 3 days, this man had seen her at her most vulnerable and her most resilient. It created an intimacy that both frightened and intrigued her. "Will you?" she began, then stopped herself. "Will I what?" he prompted. "Will you visit Jacob before you go?" she asked instead of what she truly wanted to ask. "I think he would have liked you." Roy's expression softened. "I'd be honored." The next morning dawned clear and cool, the first hint of autumn touching the air. Dahlia rose early to prepare a hearty breakfast, knowing it would be the last meal they'd share. She found Roy already awake, splitting wood by the barn despite having no obligation to do so. "Wanted to leave you with enough for a while," he explained when she brought him coffee. "Winter comes early to these parts." After breakfast, they walked together to Jacob's grave. Dahlia had fashioned a small cross from pine, with Jacob's name carefully burned into the wood. Roy stood respectfully as Dahlia placed fresh wildflowers on the mound. "Jacob Thomas Kennedy," Roy read from the marker. "Beloved son. 1863–1867. He would have been 5 next month," Dahlia said softly. Roy removed his hat. "Madam Dahlia, I'm not one for flowery words, but I believe children who are loved as deeply as your boy was leave marks on this world that don't fade, even when they're gone too soon." His sincerity brought fresh tears to Dahlia's eyes, but they weren't the devastating tears of earlier days. These felt cleansing somehow, like spring rain. "Thank you, Roy, not just for this, but for everything." They walked back to the cabin in silence, the moment of departure looming between them. Roy saddled Samson while Dahlia packed him provisions for the journey, bread she'd baked that morning, dried beef, and apples from her small orchard. "You need these more than I do," Roy protested when she handed him the bundle. "Please," she insisted. "It helps to feel useful." Understanding dawned in his eyes. He accepted the package with a nod, securing it to his saddlebag. The actual goodbye was awkward, both of them suddenly unsure how to end what had been a brief but meaningful connection. "If you're ever in need," Roy began. "I'll manage," Dahlia interrupted, then softened her tone. "But thank you." Roy mounted Samson, adjusting his hat against the morning sun. "The offer stands. Johnson's outfit runs cattle through here twice yearly." Dahlia nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. "Safe travels, Mr. Zimmerman." "Roy," he corrected with a small smile, echoing her words from days earlier. "Roy," she repeated, returning his smile with a tentative one of her own, the first he'd seen from her. With a final tip of his hat, he turned Samson toward the trail and rode away. Dahlia watched until horse and rider disappeared over the ridge, then returned to her cabin, which somehow felt both more empty and more secure than it had before Roy's arrival. The weeks that followed Roy's departure brought changes to Dahlia's homestead. Using techniques he'd shown her, she reinforced her chicken coop and planted fall crops that might actually yield before frost. The physical labor helped occupy her mind, though grief still ambushed her at unexpected moments, finding one of Jacob's socks tucked in a drawer, or hearing children's laughter from passing wagons. October brought the first snow, earlier than usual. Dahlia stared out her window at the white blanket covering Jacob's grave and wondered if she had enough supplies to last the winter. The thought of venturing into El Amosa filled her with dread. She hadn't been to town since before Jacob's death, unwilling to face the pitying looks and well-meaning but painful questions. But necessity drove her to hitch her mare to the wagon one crisp morning. The journey to town took nearly 2 hours through snowy trails. Alamosa hadn't changed, the same dusty main street lined with false-fronted buildings, the same mix of respectable businesses and saloons catering to cowboys and miners. Dahlia kept her head down as she entered the general store, a list clutched tightly in her hand. Mr. Simmons, the proprietor, recognized her immediately. "Mrs. Kennedy, haven't seen you in months." His jovial tone faltered as he remembered her circumstances. "I was mighty sorry to hear about your boy." Dahlia nodded stiffly. "Thank you, I need supplies." She handed him her list, anxious to complete her errand and return home. As Mr. Simmons gathered her items, the bell above the door jingled. Dahlia kept her attention fixed on the penny candy display, memories of Jacob's delight in such treats causing a familiar ache. "Well, I'll be Roy Zimmerman back in Alamosa," Mr. Simmons called out. "Thought your outfit was headed to Wyoming." Dahlia's head snapped up. Roy stood in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. He looked leaner than when she'd last seen him, his face more weathered from months on the trail. His eyes found hers immediately, surprise giving way to something warmer. "Change of plans," he said to Mr. Simmons, though his gaze remained on Dahlia. "Boss decided to winter the herd nearby." He removed his hat, stepping further into the store. "Miss Kennedy, didn't expect to see you in town." "Mr. Zimmerman," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I needed supplies." "How's that roof holding up?" "No leaks yet," she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Your repairs were thorough." Their exchange was interrupted by Mr. Simmons clearing his throat. "That'll be $3.45 for everything, Mrs. Kennedy." Dahlia's smile faded as she counted out her money. It was more than she'd anticipated, leaving her with precious little for emergencies. Mr. Simmons must have noticed her concern. "I could extend credit," he offered, not unkindly. "No, thank you," she said firmly, pride winning over practicality. "This will do." Roy stepped forward. "Mr. Simmons, add a sack of coffee beans and some of that sugar to Miss Kennedy's order." He placed coins on the counter before Dahlia could protest. Outside the store, Dahlia confronted him. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Zimmerman." "It's not charity to help a friend," Roy countered, helping her load supplies into her wagon despite her objections. "Besides, I still owe you for that apple pie you sent with me, best I ever had." His compliment softened her resistance somewhat. "How long will you be in Alamosa?" "All winter, looks like. Johnson found good grazing land to lease just north of here." Roy secured the last of her purchases. "We're setting up a proper camp tomorrow." Dahlia nodded, unsure what else to say. Part of her wanted to invite him to visit her homestead again, while another part, the practical, cautious part, warned against forming attachments that would inevitably end. Roy seemed to read her conflict. "I could stop by sometime, check on those repairs, if that would be welcome." Dahlia found herself nodding before she'd fully decided. "Sunday, perhaps. I usually make a larger dinner that day." "Sunday it is," Roy agreed, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. He helped her onto the wagon seat with a gentle hand at her elbow. "Drive carefully." Trails slippery in patches. Dahlia gathered the reins, oddly reluctant to leave. "Thank you for the coffee and sugar." "My pleasure, Miss Kennedy." He stepped back, replacing his hat. "See you Sunday." The ride home seemed shorter somehow, despite deteriorating weather. Dahlia found herself planning Sunday's meal, considering which of her dresses needed mending, wondering if she should cut fresh flowers for the table, then chiding herself for such thoughts. Roy Zimmerman was simply being neighborly, nothing more. Sunday arrived with clear skies and milder temperatures. Dahlia spent the morning cleaning her already tidy cabin and preparing a chicken for roasting. She changed her dress twice, finally settling on a blue calico that Thomas had always said matched her eyes. The thought of her husband brought a pang of guilt. Was it disloyal to feel this anticipation over another man's visit? Roy arrived precisely at noon, bearing gifts, a small sack of hard candies and a carved wooden horse that reminded her painfully of Jacob's toy. "Made it myself," he explained as she examined the horse. "Not as fine as your husband's work, I expect, but I thought—" He stopped, suddenly uncertain. If it's too much, too soon. Dahlia traced the horse's mane with her fingertip. "It's beautiful, Roy, thank you." The afternoon passed pleasantly. They shared the meal Dahlia had prepared, Roy complimenting her cooking with genuine appreciation. Afterward, he insisted on checking his previous repairs, adding extra support to the porch roof where snow had accumulated. As dusk approached, they sat by the fire, cups of coffee warming their hands. Dahlia found herself sharing stories about Jacob and Thomas that she'd kept locked inside for months. Roy listened attentively, occasionally offering his own memories of family lost and lessons learned. "You've made a good life here," Roy observed, looking around the small but comfortable cabin. "Takes courage to hold on after losing so much." "Some days I'm not sure if it's courage or just stubbornness," Dahlia admitted. "There are moments I consider selling everything and going back east." "What stops you?" Dahlia's gaze drifted to the window through which Jacob's grave was visible in the fading light. "He's here," she said simply. "And Thomas. They're spirits anyway, I'm not ready to leave them." Roy nodded, understanding in his eyes. Roots matter, even the painful ones. When it came time for him to leave, Dahlia found herself reluctant to end the evening. "You're welcome to visit again," she offered, "when you have time." "I'd like that," Roy said, donning his coat. "Johnson gives us Sundays off, perhaps next week." "I'd like that too," Dahlia replied, surprising herself with her forthrightness. The winter months established a pattern. Each Sunday, Roy would arrive at noon, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book of poetry, fresh venison, once a bolt of cloth he'd traded for in town. They would share a meal, work on projects around the homestead, and talk by the fire until the encroaching darkness forced his departure. Dahlia began to mark her weeks by these visits, finding herself looking forward to Sundays in a way that both comforted and confused her. Roy was unfailingly respectful, never overstepping boundaries, yet she sensed his feelings might be deepening as hers were. Christmas approached, bringing with it memories of past holidays with Jacob. Dahlia found herself sinking into melancholy as the day neared. The previous Christmas had been Jacob's last, though they hadn't known it then. He'd been so excited about the small wooden train Thomas had carved for him. On the Sunday before Christmas, Roy arrived to find Dahlia quieter than usual, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Hard time of year," he observed as they sat down to dinner. Dahlia nodded, grateful for his perception. Jacob loved Christmas. He'd start talking about it in October, making lists of things he hoped Santa would bring. "What would be on his list this year, do you think?" Roy asked gently. The question startled her. No one had encouraged her to imagine Jacob's ongoing life, what he might have become, what he might have wanted. Most people awkwardly changed the subject when she mentioned him. "A real pony," she said after consideration. "He'd been asking for one since he could talk." Roy smiled. "Sounds like a boy who knew his mind." "He did," Dahlia agreed, feeling the knot in her chest loosen slightly. "What about you? Any Christmas traditions?" "Not for many years," Roy admitted. "Trail life doesn't leave much room for celebration. My sister used to make cinnamon bread for Christmas morning. That smell still takes me back." They spent the afternoon exchanging memories of Christmases past. For the first time, Dahlia found herself able to talk about Jacob without being consumed by grief. The pain was still there, but it had softened somewhat, allowing room for fond recollection. As Roy prepared to leave that evening, he hesitated by the door. "Would it be inappropriate if I came by on Christmas Day, just for an hour or so?" Dahlia considered the alternative, spending the day alone with her memories. "I would welcome the company," she said honestly. Roy nodded, relief evident in his expression. "I'll bring dinner. You've been cooking for me all these Sundays." "You don't need to, I want to," he interrupted gently. "Let someone take care of you for a change." His words touched something deep within her, a longing to share burdens rather than always carrying them alone. "All right," she conceded, "but nothing elaborate." Christmas Day dawned bright and clear, sunlight reflecting off snow-covered fields. Dahlia woke early, placing a small pouch of tobacco on Jacob's grave, a tradition Thomas had started on their first Christmas in Colorado. "Merry Christmas, little one," she whispered, tracing her son's name on the wooden cross. "Mama misses you." For the first time, the words didn't bring tears. Instead, she felt a sense of peace, as if Jacob somehow heard her. She stayed a few moments longer, then returned to the cabin to prepare for Roy's visit. He arrived at midday, his arms laden with packages, a pot of stew kept warm in blankets, fresh bread, and a small evergreen branch decorated with ribbons and pine cones. "Thought we needed something festive," he explained, setting the impromptu Christmas decoration on the table. They shared the meal. He'd brought venison stew that he proudly admitted cooking himself. "My trail cooking's improved over the years," he said when she complimented the flavor. "Had to, or the other hands would have thrown me to the wolves." After eating, Roy produced a small package wrapped in brown paper and string. "Merry Christmas, Dahlia," she took it hesitantly. "I didn't get you anything." "Wasn't expecting anything," he assured her. "Open it." Inside was a silver locket on a delicate chain. Dahlia opened it to find it empty, waiting for memories to be preserved. "It was my mother's," Roy explained. "Thought you might want it for," he stopped, then continued more carefully, "for whatever memories you want to keep close." The thoughtfulness of the gift moved her deeply. "It's beautiful, Roy, but I can't accept something so personal with such history." "It's been in my saddlebag for years," he said. "Would mean more to see it worn." His sincerity persuaded her. Dahlia lifted the chain, attempting to fasten it around her neck. Roy stood, moving behind her to help. His fingers brushed her skin as he secured the clasp, sending an unexpected warmth through her. "Thank you," she said, turning to face him. They stood closer than propriety might allow, but neither moved away. "Suits you," Roy observed, his voice lower than usual. A tension filled the space between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with unspoken possibilities. For a moment, Dahlia thought he might kiss her. For a moment, she wanted him to. The spell broke when a log shifted in the fireplace, sending sparks up the chimney. Roy stepped back, clearing his throat. "Should probably head back before dark." Dahlia nodded, a mix of relief and disappointment washing over her. "Of course." At the door, Roy paused. "Dahlia, he seemed to search for words. "I've valued these Sundays more than I can rightly express." "As have I," she admitted. "Spring will come soon enough and the drive will move on," he continued. "But I'd like to keep visiting if you're agreeable." The implied permanence of his request wasn't lost on Dahlia. "I'd like that too, Roy." His smile warmed her more than the fire. "Merry Christmas, Dahlia Kennedy." "Merry Christmas, Roy Zimmerman." As winter thawed into spring, Roy's Sunday visits continued. He began arriving earlier and staying later, sometimes not leaving until the stars were fully visible. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond safe topics to dreams and fears, regrets and hopes. Dahlia learned about Roy's childhood in Texas, his father's harsh lessons, his decision to leave home at 16. She shared her own story, her sheltered upbringing in Pennsylvania, her whirlwind courtship with Thomas, their journey west in search of land and opportunity. One April Sunday, as they planted Dahlia's vegetable garden together, Roy broached a subject they'd both been avoiding. "Johnson's talking about moving the herd north soon," he said, carefully placing bean seeds in the furrow Dahlia had drawn. She kept her eyes on her work, though her hands stilled momentarily. "When? Couple of weeks, most likely." Roy patted soil over the seeds. "Wyoming this time, maybe Montana." Dahlia nodded, resuming her planting. "Will you be gone long, through summer at least?" He hesitated. "Unless I don't go." This made her look up. "What do you mean?" Roy sat back on his heels, meeting her gaze directly. "Been thinking about settling down." Johnson mentioned he might sell part of the land he leased this winter. Good grazing, good water access. "You're considering staying in Alamosa?" Dahlia couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "Been considering a lot of things, Dahlia." His tone was significant, his meaning clear. She looked away, suddenly overwhelmed. Part of her had known they were approaching this conversation, but facing it directly made her pulse quicken with both anticipation and fear. "Roy, she began, then stopped, uncertain how to proceed. He stood, wiping soil from his hands. "Don't need an answer today, just wanted you to know my thoughts." Dahlia rose as well, appreciating his patience. "I care for you," she said honestly, "more than I expected to care for anyone again." "But," he prompted gently. "But I'm afraid," she admitted, "of losing someone else I love. Of betraying Thomas's memory. She gestured helplessly. "Of everything changing." Roy nodded, accepting her fears without dismissing them. "Change comes whether we invite it or not, but I understand needing time." They finished planting in companionable silence, the unresolved question hanging between them but not creating distance. Before he left that evening, Roy took her hand, the first such gesture he'd initiated. "Whatever you decide, Dahlia, know that these months have been a gift I never expected." She squeezed his hand, unable to articulate the complex emotions swirling within her. "Thank you for your patience." "Some things are worth waiting for," he replied simply. The following Sunday, Dahlia woke with a sense of certainty that had eluded her for months. She spent the morning at Jacob's grave, speaking aloud to her son as if he could hear her. "I think Daddy would understand," she said, arranging fresh wildflowers on the small mound. "He always said happiness shouldn't be wasted when it comes your way." By the time Roy arrived, Dahlia had made her decision. They walked together to the cottonwood tree where Jacob rested, Roy respectfully removing his hat as they approached. "I visit him every morning," Dahlia explained. "Talk to him about my day, what I'm planning." Roy nodded. "What did you tell him today?" Dahlia took a deep breath. "That I've been given a second chance at happiness, and I'd be foolish not to take it." Understanding dawned in Roy's eyes, but he waited for her to continue. "Life out here is too hard and too short to deny love when it comes," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. "I love Thomas with all my heart. I'll always love Jacob. But my heart, it seems, has room for more." Roy stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Dahlia nodded. "If you're still considering staying in Alamosa, I'd like to be part of that consideration." The smile that broke across Roy's face was like sunrise after a long night. "Dahlia Kennedy, you've been my only consideration for months now." When he kissed her, it felt both entirely new and somehow familiar, as if some part of her had been waiting for this moment. His arms encircled her waist, strong but gentle. When they parted, Dahlia felt tears on her cheeks, but for the first time in over a year they were tears of joy. "I should speak to the preacher," Roy said, his voice rough with emotion. "Do things properly." Dahlia laughed, the sound surprising them both. "Yes, I suppose we should follow convention, even if our courtship has been anything but conventional." They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, making plans that now included both of them. Roy would purchase the land from Johnson, combining it with Dahlia's homestead to create a viable ranch. They would marry in summer, when the wildflowers Jacob loved were in full bloom. 2 months later, on a perfect June morning, Dahlia stood in her bedroom, adjusting the locket Roy had given her at Christmas. Inside now were two small portraits, Thomas on one side, Jacob on the other. Keeping them close felt right for this day, a reminder that past love enriched rather than diminished present joy. Her wedding dress was simple cream-colored cotton with lace she'd saved from her first wedding. Mrs. Simmons, the storekeeper's wife, had helped alter it, taking in the waist that had grown slimmer through grief and hard work. A knock at the door preceded Mrs. Simmons herself, her round face beaming. "Ready, dear. Everyone's waiting at the church." Dahlia took a final look in the small mirror. At 28, she was starting over, not erasing her past, but building upon it. "Yes," she said with certainty, "I'm ready." The small church in Alamosa was filled with well-wishers, neighbors who had kept their distance during her mourning, now eager to celebrate her happiness. Cowboys from Johnson's outfit who'd come to support Roy. Even the town doctor who had tried unsuccessfully to save Jacob, his presence a reminder of how life's sorrows and joys often intertwined. Roy waited at the altar, more nervous than he'd been facing down rustlers or stampeding cattle. When Dahlia appeared at the church entrance, a collective murmur of appreciation swept through the congregation. She carried wildflowers gathered from near Jacob's grave. Her something borrowed was Mrs. Simmons's pearl earrings. Her something blew the ribbon holding back her golden brown hair. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began once Dahlia reached Roy's side, "we are gathered here to witness the union of two souls who have found each other through hardship and healing." The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When they exchanged vows, Roy's voice was steady, his eyes never leaving Dahlia's. Her own voice trembled slightly but gained strength with each word. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared finally. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Roy's kiss was gentle but promising, drawing approving chuckles from his fellow cowboys. As they turned to face their guests as Mr. and Mrs. Zimmerman, Dahlia felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This wasn't betraying her past, it was honoring it by finding the courage to love again. The celebration moved to the town hall, where tables groaned with potluck offerings from every household in Alamosa. Dancing followed dinner, with Roy proving surprisingly graceful despite his protestations about having 2 left feet. "Never thought I'd see Zimmerman settling down," Johnson remarked as they shared a quiet moment at the edge of the dance floor. "Must be something special about you, Mrs. Zimmerman." "Or something special about him," Dahlia countered with a smile. As sunset painted the Colorado sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Roy and Dahlia slipped away from the celebration. They rode in the wagon Roy had restored for her, now decorated with ribbons and flowers, toward their home, her homestead that would now be theirs together. They stopped at the cottonwood tree first, a private moment before beginning their married life. Dahlia placed her bridal bouquet on Jacob's grave, while Roy set a small carved horse beside it, a token from a stepfather to a boy he would never meet, but would always honor. "I think they'd be happy for us," Dahlia said softly, leaning against Roy's shoulder. "I think so too," he agreed, his arm encircling her waist. "Jacob especially. Boys need fathers." The statement hung in the air, meaningful but not demanding. Dahlia turned to face her new husband. "Someday," she said, making it both promise and hope. "Not to replace him, but to add to our family," Roy finished for her. "When you're ready." They continued to their cabin now, where Roy surprised her by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Inside, everything was familiar yet different, transformed by the promise of shared tomorrows. Later that night, as they lay entwined in what was now their bed, Dahlia traced the lines of Roy's face in the moonlight. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "For finding me at my darkest moment. For seeing strength in me when I saw only brokenness." Roy pulled her closer. "You did the same for me, Dahlia. I was drifting, no roots, no purpose beyond the next cattle drive. And now we build something together," he said simply, "day by day." The first year of their marriage brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Roy learned the rhythms of farming to complement his ranching knowledge. Dahlia adapted to sharing decisions after years of independence. They built a larger barn, expanded the vegetable garden, and added a small herd of cattle, the beginnings of the ranch Roy had envisioned. They continued their Sunday tradition, but now it was visiting Jacob's grave together, keeping his memory alive while creating new memories of their own. Roy often told stories of his adventures on cattle drives, imagining the boys' delight in tales of stampedes and river crossings. In their second spring together, as wildflowers once again covered the plains surrounding Alamosa, Dahlia shared news that filled them both with tentative joy. "The doctor confirms it," she said, returning from town one afternoon. "We're expecting a child in November." Roy's reaction was everything she'd hoped, excitement tempered with understanding of her complex emotions. "Are you all right with this?" he asked, holding her hands in his. "Truly." Dahlia nodded, tears and smile mingling. "Scared but happy. Very happy." As her pregnancy progressed, Dahlia found herself talking to Jacob more often, telling her firstborn about the sibling who would soon join their family. Roy built a cradle, more elaborate than necessary, working late into the night to perfect each detail. "This little one will be the most spoiled child in Colorado," Dahlia teased, watching him sand the wood to silken smoothness. "Just well loved," Roy corrected with a smile. "Like their mother." November brought early snow, and with it, their daughter Rebecca Grace Zimmerman, born after a difficult but ultimately successful labor. She had Roy's dark hair and Dahlia's blue eyes, a perfect blend of them both. "She's beautiful," Roy whispered, holding his daughter for the first time, awe evident in his expression. "Perfect." Dahlia watched them together, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. This joy didn't diminish her love for Jacob, it expanded it, creating new spaces in her heart she hadn't known existed. On Rebecca's first birthday, they bundled her warmly against the November chill and took her to meet her brother. Dahlia knelt beside Jacob's grave, now marked with a proper headstone Roy had commissioned from Denver. "Jacob, this is your sister Rebecca," she said, helping the toddler place flowers beside the stone. "She's walking now, getting into everything just like you did." Roy stood nearby, giving Dahlia this moment while staying close enough to offer support if needed. Rebecca babbled happily, unaware of the significance of this place, but responding to her mother's tone. "She would have adored you," Dahlia continued, brushing leaves from the grave marker. "And you would have been the best big brother." As the years passed, their family grew. Rebecca was joined by a brother, Thomas Roy, named for both the men who had shaped Dahlia's life. Later came another daughter, Sarah, whose arrival completed their family. The Zimmerman Ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the San Luis Valley. Roy's knowledge of cattle combined with Dahlia's farming skills created a diversified and resilient business that weathered drought years and market fluctuations. They never forgot how they began, a broken-hearted mother digging her child's grave, a cowboy who stopped to help. Each year on the anniversary of Jacob's death, the entire family would gather beneath the cottonwood tree, sharing stories and memories, teaching the younger children about the brother they never knew, but who remained an important part of their family's story. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Roy surprised Dahlia with a small package after the children had gone to bed. "What's this?" she asked, untying the ribbon. Inside was a journal, its leather cover embossed with the words "Our Story." Roy had painstakingly recorded their journey together, beginning with that first day beneath the cottonwood tree. "So our children will understand where they came from," he explained as Dahlia turned the pages, reading his careful handwriting. "How love can grow even in the hardest soil." Dahlia closed the journal, holding it to her chest. At 38, she had experienced more joy and sorrow than many did in twice that time. The lines around her eyes spoke of both laughter and tears. The strength in her hands told of work and purpose. "I never imagined this life," she said, looking around their comfortable home, hearing their children's soft breathing from the adjoining rooms. "After Jacob died, I thought joy was finished for me." Roy took her hand, his touch as reassuring now as it had been that first day. "Life has a way of surprising us." "Indeed it does," Dahlia agreed, leaning against the shoulder that had supported her through grief and joy alike. "Indeed it does." Outside their window, the Colorado night spread star-filled and vast. The same sky that had witnessed their beginning now watching over their continuing story, a story of loss transformed not into forgetting, but into the courage to love again. Years later, when their grandchildren gathered around to hear stories of the old days, Dahlia would tell them about a cowboy who once found a grieving mother digging her child's grave and stopped to help. She would explain how healing doesn't mean leaving grief behind, but rather learning to carry it differently, alongside joy. And Roy, his hair now silver but his eyes still kind, would add that sometimes the most important journeys aren't the ones that take you far from home, but the ones that finally bring you home, to the people who become your heart's true destination.